Last week, the University of Guyana hosted a conference on sustainable development through the good offices of the U.S. Embassy. I have the privilege to have our guest today, Dr. Janaki Alavalapati, who has worked extensively in the United States, Canada, and India, conducting research and providing outreach services. He's also taught and conducted research on short or frequent visits to China, the Czech Republic, Rwanda, and the United Kingdom, and has visited a number of other institutions to attend conferences and make presentations. Dr. Janaki, if I can call you.
Sure.
Welcome to Plain Talk.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Thank you very much for having me.
Can you tell us what brought you to Guyana?
Sure. Just before I explain what brought me to Guyana, I just wanted to make sure that what are the factors responsible supporting my visit here. I'm a professor at Virginia Tech, head of the Department of Forest Resources and Conservation at Virginia Tech. So that institution
in the United States of America.
In the United States, it is helping me by providing its time. And there is a program called Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas program that was initiated back in 2000 by President Obama. The intent of that program is essentially to bring stakeholders together, stakeholders meaning government agencies, non-governmental agencies, private sector, and academia, to come up with common understanding of the common issues surrounding energy and climate issues in these two Americas, and to leverage resources in terms of intellectual capital, financial capital, or infrastructure, or the technology issues to solve these problems collectively. Under that program, a set of fellows have been identified by scanning across the country, and within that program there are 7 themes, and one of the themes is sustainable forestry and land use. And the way the process works out this way is essentially the national governments make a request through U.S. embassies in these Americas. Okay, we would like to have an expert.
So your presence here would be because the government of Guyana would have made a request.
Yes, Guyana's government actually made a request. We would like to have a forestry expert who has understanding in climate change, energy, and other issues, and sustainable forestry. And then the U.S. Embassy identified me as one of the ECPA fellows, which is Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas Fellows. And then there is an organization called the Partners of the Americas, who is the implementing agency for this ECPA program. So the U.S. Embassy made a request to Partners of the Americas, and Partners of the Americas asked me to go here and interface with stakeholders. So that is how I got here into Guyana, to explore opportunities to move forward on sustainable forestry.
Twice you mentioned climate change and energy. What, in fact, Professor, is the link between these two?
Well, there is a direct and indirect link from forestry to climate change and energy. One is forests can sequester a lot of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere if we properly manage and conserve those forest resources. As the tree grows, it absorbs a lot of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to grow the tree. So that's how forests can actually sequester a lot of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. But if you mercilessly or unwisely cut these forest resources and burning or something takes place, then immediately through that burning process, the carbon can go back to the atmosphere very quickly. So that is the reason why people have scientists have estimated nearly 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions are taking place through deforestation and degradation. So how can we actually come up with plans not deforestation, degradation happen, so that we don't put 20% of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere? That is one piece. The other piece is as you produce timber, and if you convert the timber, not if actually, when you convert the timber into wood products or pulp and paper, all these things are carbon stored. So putting those products into use is also a lot of carbon is stored in those products. And if you try to develop some kind of energy sources from that biomass, in other countries actually a lot of efforts are being made actually to utilize forest biomass to produce either liquid fuels or the electricity generation or heating. Particularly European countries are importing lots and lots of forest biomass in the form of pellets to generate electricity so that they don't have to use fossil fuels such as coal and other energy sources. So as a result, a lot of carbon dioxide is limited by not going into the atmosphere. So there are two ways forestry plays a critical role to climate change.
Professor, this issue of climate change has been a big problem, a big topic in your own country. There are still many people at high levels of government in the United States of America who challenge scientists who advance this issue of climate change. Is there merit in their cynicism, in their questions?
Well, there might be contradicting reports or maybe talks, but if you look at the scientific evidence, there is a compelling scientific evidence showing that yes, as a result of human factors, there is, greenhouse gas emissions are taking place as a result of global warming is taking place, as a result of climate change is happening. And the current administration, President Obama, is so committed actually to address this climate change. Not too long ago, he made a very good speech at one of the universities right in Washington, D.C., laying out how to move forward in terms of addressing this climate change. But coming back to your question, yes, that's in a way that's a good thing to for some people based on their own perceptions or their own the research, if they are showing that okay, this is not coming as a result of human interactions, but maybe it is a kind of natural cycles, that itself also provides the scientific community to explore more rigorously and come up with scientific findings. That's what exactly it is happening actually. So that is the reason why whenever there is a comment or concern, okay, in the opposite direction, yes, a lot of but I think it is fair to say that there is more and more compelling evidence that yes, climate change is true, and it is due to largely due to human factors. So that's what if you look at the United Nations organization, also the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they put together a lot of scientific-based documentation, showing a lot of specifics. So yes, in spite of all these things, yes, government is very committed to address this climate change, and towards that commitment, this ECPA, which is Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas program, is an indication.
But is it not also true that once you say government, and I mean, and even President Obama, he was a bit slow. Many people think he was a bit slow to act on climate change. His first term didn't get the kind of attention that people thought was justified. But in terms of the Congress and the Senate, are they sold on the idea? Are they prepared to? Are they accepting the reality and saying, look, well, we've really got to reduce our emissions?
I believe so, yes. Government has its own strategies, but to what extent commitment is there from both, from the Congress? Sure, if you look at the research funding record in the last few years, let me give one example. Actually, U.S. Department of Agriculture. That's where colleges such as ours, we get huge funding. It is unprecedented growth in research funding from U.S. Department of Agriculture to explore climate change issues. They have created actually as big as $40 million projects to explore energy and climate change issues in the past few years. So again, it is eye of the beholder, whether it is the current administration is slowly reacting, but I think there is a significant evidence is there in the form of large research funding to academic institutions, and also a lot of private sector actually to promote research and bring the private sector on board to move forward with the energy and climate change issues.
As a specialist yourself, how grave is the situation on global warming? How threatened are countries across the world?
It could be serious. Again, when those things are going to happen, it's very difficult to put a number behind that one. But yes, a lot of scientific reports are out there, documenting, how much sea levels are going to rise as a result of these things. What kind of severe drought situations are going to happen. Again, I'm not, like, for example, if you look at reports and in the media, the recent severe drought situation in Mississippi Delta region, sure, is that purely because of climate change? I'm not here to say that one, but
I was going to ask you that, whether that and Sandy could be attributed, in fact.
Well, it's sure. Again, as I said, a lot of symptoms, for the lack of better term, are out there actually as what is happening due to global warming. On one hand, yes, there is, and if these things are going to happen in a slightest way, we're talking about shaking the ecosystem. Whether it is biodiversity, some areas, agriculture lands might become unproductive, some coastal areas might get submerged. All these things are very serious, and some of the vulnerable communities across these, in these areas, how do they cope with this kind of situation is also very serious.
So the initiative by President Obama, the ECPA, you place within the broader context of climate change and global warming.
Correct. This is the overarching program, and within that program you have 7 pillars. Those pillars can range anywhere from energy efficiency, renewable energy production, climate change, and adaptation. And this pillar, which I am focusing during this visit, is forestry and sustainable forest and land use. As I said, forestry has direct implications to energy and climate change. That is the reason why U.S. State Department actually identified this as one of the 7 pillars within this program. Again, is this the only program that this government is pursuing to address? No. There are so many other programs out there. As I said, U.S. Department of Agriculture is funding a lot of projects actually within the country, to understand better this complex issue and to come up with more advanced solutions to address this issue. And in terms of energy, I'm sure you may be aware that under 2007 ESA, which is Energy Independence and Security Act of the United States, the government is scheduled to produce 36 billion gallons of liquid fuels, the biofuels, by 2022. But the government is also very key or very much aware that the government does not want to use a lot of food-based feedstock to produce those kinds of biofuels. So that is the reason why the government voluntarily embraced that concern and put a cap of producing only 15 billion gallons of liquid fuels from food-based feedstock. And the other 21 billion gallons must come from advanced feedstocks or non-food-based feedstocks. So that is the reason why a lot of research and a lot of private sector stimulus is going on, to produce that 21 billion gallons of liquid biofuels to meet the targets by 2022. So that is another indication, how much committed the government is in terms of bring these biofuels and displace fossil fuels. And we know the linkage between the displacing fossil fuels and addressing the climate change. Research documentation exists that if you displace 1 unit of fossil fuels with 1 unit of biofuels, you're talking about, depending upon what feedstock you use, like if you are using cellulosic feedstocks, you can actually displacing 70 to 80% of emissions relative to fossil fuel. So that's the reason why government is focusing a lot to understand the biofuels markets.
What's the economics of it? Does it, as it is at the moment with our the knowledge of science and technology?
Sure.
Is it going to increase costs?
Right now the food-based feedstocks to produce ethanol, yes, it is competitive. That is the reason why, if you look at the maybe 2 or 3 years production processes, it was maybe about 3-4 billion gallons, but now I think we are somewhere 12 billion gallons or 13 billion gallons, using a lot of corn as the feedstock. So the commercial scale of production using corn as a feedstock, absolutely. So that is the reason why I think it is quite economically viable. But this cellulosic ethanol or advanced biofuels, a lot of demonstration plants are there. It is technically feasible, but economically it is not competitive at this point. So that is the reason why U.S. Department of Energy and U.S. Department of Agriculture is focusing a lot to work with the private sector, to make that switch. How can we make it commercially viable? On one hand, a lot of folks are exploring opportunities through thermochemical processes to produce effectively these advanced biofuels. On the other hand, biochemical, using some kind of innovative bugs, to produce these things. So I think, in my opinion, probably Department of Energy should be, breaking this hard nut and making it possible commercially producing commercially viable second generation biofuels.
You mentioned the 7 initiatives: energy efficiency, renewable energy, energy infrastructure, energy poverty. How interrelated are these, or do they stand alone?
Well, energy is going to have linkages across all the things. Ensure what kind of energy you are going to produce, and how much you are going to use, and what ways you are going to use that energy. So in a way, if you are going to use lots of fossil fuels, either domestically or by importing, you are going to produce a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. Mm-hmm. But if you don't want to use,
is that what is called carbon footprint?
Sure, absolutely, sure. How much footprint you are using. That footprint depends upon what kind of energy sources you are going to use, whether it is solar, biofuels, or wind, or nuclear, or any other things. So, how can you minimize? One way is, yes, use the same amount of energy from these sources to create a smaller footprint. That is one way. The second way is, which again Department of Energy in the United States is focusing very heavily, is, how can we work with households, private sector, farmers, you name it, to improve in the efficiency side. Do they have to use that much? Even if you're talking about driving vehicles, these days at our place, at academic setting, there is a huge discussions and awareness programs, and also market incentives within the university setting to carpool. Mm-hmm. So those are the kind of things we are talking about to reduce carbon footprint from energy source. And the other side is, see, the energy is going to be very central to boost the economic activity. All said and done, every country wants to promote their economic activity and advance employment opportunities. But if the energy costs are so high, right there they lose competitiveness, relative to other markets. So that is the reason why some governments actually provide subsidies. Sometimes some governments, in the interest of actually promoting environmental quality, they might put more penalties. But in some countries, simply lack of energy production is going to cost very high prices for energy. That means consumers and industry have to pay high costs.
One of the initiatives has a certain emotional or emotive ring about it: energy poverty. What exactly does that mean?
Well, energy poverty is, by not having enough energy sources, the communities or societies could be facing poverty, just like economic. Look at economic poverty. If you have more income, yes, you will be identified as a rich person. But if you also have a lot of energy sources, yes, energy-rich country. But energy poverty means, you may have other resources, but enough energy sources may not be there. So in a way, to that extent, that society or community is energy poverty. Like, for example, the city may have energy, but in the nearby community, if they don't have energy, they may have a lot of land base. They may have some kind of productive resources, but lack of energy, that energy poverty is going to hit very badly, for them to explore a lot of economic activities.
How do you, because as you talk about the energy poverty, persons with wealth don't mind if you step out of the room and you leave the AC on and you leave all the lights on, you leave the swimming pool on. How do you create a system of incentivizing economic use of energy resources?
Well, a lot of the department, I need to go back to the strategies that Department of Energy is actually, promoting across the country is a range of strategies actually. If you talk about agriculture farmers, how best agriculture farmers can buy innovative equipment that can take only fewer fuels, or the fewer quantities of fuels, then they can actually provide some kind of incentives. Hey, we can put some kind of cost sharing programs if you go and buy this one. Then for households, a lot of tax incentives are there, to do a lot of, whether you are buying a refrigerator that takes only less amount of energy. So those kinds of programs are plenty actually. So those are, how best you can improve the efficiency in your living or in your production processes. So market-based incentives work. My profession is actually, I'm an economist. So believe me, yes, smallest market incentives would go a long way. But sometimes, does the government have enough tax dollars to promote these kinds of things? It depends. But that's where when you formulate a strategy, you need to look at the rate of return. Okay, by promoting this kind of cost share program, how much the impact factor is going to be.
Could you see in America, one sees the mid-sized cars now on the roads of America. They're pretty standard, they're routine, they're everywhere. Can you see, particularly with changes in fracking bringing about a wealth of energy resources, do you see America returning to the bad old days?
You mean the driving bigger vehicles? And
yeah.
No, I would not, because there is a lot of awareness among households and private sector actually to use energy sources wisely, even if it is available at affordable rates. Most of the, if you go to, most of this, neighborhoods, whether it is rich or middle income or anything, the energy efficiency used by buying different types of bulbs, or carpooling, as I said, to go to workplace, even investing in vehicles actually, that gives greater mileage.
Yeah.
So on one hand, the supply side is actually, they are producing a lot of efficient vehicles, but at the same time, consumers are also responding, actually buying those kinds of vehicles, although they cost a little bit more. So it's not that
Cost, the initial cost will be more,
Yeah,
but
well,
probably the life cycle cost
absolutely,
might be.
but if you put those things, how much energy you are saving over time, it would be very beneficial. So that is the reason why I don't expect, because it is it's a kind of endogenous change, endogenous transformation of households, communities, and the private sector, which is making this switch happen. So that's the reason why I don't envision, again going back to the old days, even if energy becomes cheaper and more available.
Do you see with these changes, energy in fact becoming cheaper and more easily available?
Well, again, it depends. It depends if more and more efficiency takes place. So that means the quantity of energy consumption is going to drop significantly. What do you happen? What does that mean to the barrel of oil? It's going to come down, and once it comes down significantly, of course, consumers are very, price responsive.
Yes.
Again, there might be a possibility to use more, fuel, and it happened once upon a time, like in 1970, when OPEC jacked up its prices significantly. So that's when all these renewable energy research and private sector also engaged to come up with some kind of alternative strategies. What happened was then afterwards, the prices went down.
Yeah.
Then most of the bioenergy research went onto the shelf. But what is the difference between then and now is the awareness of, as I said, households, private sector, and communities is essentially, hey, we need to be doing something to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So that kind of change, I think, in my opinion, it's going to make a difference compared to the historical trend.
Because now you have the issue of global warming. I was in England in the 70s when the prices went up. Yes, it influenced demand, price elasticity, but the global warming wasn't on the horizon at that stage. In terms of the popular dialogue, it wasn't a big issue then, global warming in the 70s, was it?
In 1970s, no. Actually, most of the discussions about climate change came after this 1997 Kyoto Protocol. That's when the traction, or the momentum started to gain across the national governments, across the non-governmental organizations. So that Kyoto Protocol discussions and that has spurred a lot of discussion.
I have a slightly different time frame in terms of that. I think I thought it was Rio in 1992.
Sure, but I'm not disagreeing with you on that one. 1990.
But yes, I think Kyoto actually put it within the framework.
That conference has provided a lot of momentum, but specifically targeting towards climate change. 1992 is Earth Summit. Is a kind of overall sustainable development.
Yes.
Discussions started at that conference, but after 5 years, specialized institutions were created actually to focus on climate change, and that has prompted actually to come up with this 1997 Kyoto Protocol.
If China, America, and India don't sign on to these treaties for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and they probably are doing it at a national level. China is, India is, America. Do you see a problem for the world and for the movement towards better regulation and use?
Well, China and India, they are part of Kyoto Protocol, but their category is annexed 2 countries,
yes,
which are they were defined as developing countries, although their economic growth is phenomenal, more than any other country these days. So they are part of Kyoto Protocol, and the Kyoto Protocol is in place right now with a lot of support from European countries and other developed countries. But US has chosen to pursue to address climate change in its own way, through other mechanisms, working with the private sector, investing more resources in the research, and those kinds of things. So by not formally engaging into Kyoto Protocol, that does not mean that US is not doing or not pursuing anything in terms of climate change. It's doing a lot.
But do you see that separate path by the US impacting on the perception and the sincerity with which the ECPA and Barack Obama, President Obama,
well,
are held?
I'm not sure about that one, because the reason is, pursuing alternative strategies is a good thing for the global community. Hey, these countries are doing this way, but such XYZ countries are doing in another way, to address the climate change. So it's a kind of, it becomes a good learning environment. I don't think this is going to make a big change in the perception of other countries, to participate in the climate change equation. Again, there are other countries, even India and China. See, currently they may be under Annex 2. When they would become Annex 1 but right now, the way the Kyoto Protocol is structured, there is a kind of advantage for these countries to be on the Annex 2 side. But those are the things they need to be revisited and have a dialogue openly. When do we reconsider or consider these countries to become or so-called rich countries or Annex 1 countries? Then again, as the time progresses, things might change in very many ways.
You yourself are an academic. The conference you hear, your academic conference, how do you bring academia and industry and commerce into what has to be this common goal?
That's a great question, actually, because these days I can speak from the United States context. Pretty much, if you look at the land grant universities, that is where historically federal government supported these universities to set up under 1862 land grant system. Most of these universities have corporate research parks right next to them, which is essentially university owned or operated or facilitated, where these ideas are being incubated with the support from private sector. You name it, you go to Virginia Tech, or you go to University of Florida or North Carolina State University, big research parks. So what these
when we say park, just for the benefit of viewers, what size are we talking about?
We are talking about, I don't know, maybe hundreds of acres of land with so many different types of private sector involvement. Like, say for example, if there is a biotechnology to produce agriculture or forestry seedlings in a very innovative way. There are a lot of biotechnology practices. This is just an example. You could produce a tree seedling these days by altering the lignin structure, which is causing the real problems of cost enhancement to convert into biofuels. So to alter the lignin content in that forest biomass and grow fast. So that means you're not only decreasing the unit cost production of biofuel, but you're also growing fast to enhance the productivity on per unit basis. Now, the private sector, so the university is going to come up with that technique, then the private sector is going to just take that one and undertake some kind of demonstration plots or something, then commercially go for commercialization. So those kinds of things, whether it is energy production, biotechnology, medical, a lot of things, we call this as a kind of incubation facilities. The technologies are incubated, then commercially, make it commercially viable. And that's where the government is also involving actually to facilitate the creation of this so-called research parks.
Some of that research and its application might be leading to genetically modified. And there's some suspicion, particularly from the European side, about this.
Absolutely. Actually, again, that is a great question as well. Two of my colleagues actually, when was that? In March or April, I don't remember exactly the month, but they were attending a forest biotechnology conference in North Carolina, which is the next state to ours. There were about 300 plus scientists to understand from each other and what is going on in terms of these things. They did not anticipate a protest right in front of their building, against their practices.
Yeah.
So yes, to what extent we need to have some kind of checks and balances behind these kinds of things. So that's where the government intervention, to make sure that what processes are going to be benign and what processes are not going to be benign. Those kinds of things. But again, always there will be, I'm not going to say that whatever the outcome or output that is going to come out of this biotechnology research is going to be fascinating for the entire. You see, that's where we need to understand, and that's where we need to involve some kind of multidisciplinary scientists. Okay, hey, what are the benefits? What are the consequences?
What are the ethical issues?
Sure, ethical issues, social issues. To me, I don't know if I'm going to deviate this one, but it is very appropriate for me to mention. Back in 1975, one think tank person called Marian Claassen, who was working for the Resources for the Future in Washington, D.C., wrote a small book in the context of forestry. The title was Forests for Whom and for What. He said, whenever we talk about sustainable forestry or forest management, we need to pose 5 questions. Okay, whatever the proposal you are trying to make for forestry, is it biophysically feasible? Is it economically viable? Is it environmentally sustainable? Is it socio-culturally acceptable? And 5th, is it administratively?
And that's in the 70s, you said?
Pardon me?
That's in the 70s?
In 75.
Yeah. Interesting.
It's macro questions. So, that's where we need to be posing these biotechnology issues. That's where it's not just you produce a technology without understanding the consequences. But, again, this afternoon, our visitation with Sham Nokta, the
climate change.
The climate change lead here, he said, whenever we deal with these kinds of complex issues, it is so critical to engage diverse stakeholders right in the beginning. Because if you think that, hey, they're not going to support to move forward, but at a later stage, those things are going to bite us back.
You have moved from a tropical country, India, to a developed country, the USA. How different are the forestry characteristics in a technical sense, one from the other?
Well, in India, depending upon which location you're talking about, we have a variety of forests. We have tropical rainforests. We have tropical deciduous forests. That's where most of the teak is grown, Tectona grandis is grown. We have bamboo forests. But if you go to some places, we have pine plantations, which are quite similar to the United States.
Yes.
So, and each forest has to be managed in its own way. So just like here, we follow selective felling in some areas in India, but in the United States also. But these days, in the United States, mostly farming, private farming, tree farming is taking place, where you can produce a lot of wood by using single species, whether it is different pine species or maybe poplars or whatever. But mostly tree farming from private people, that's where most of the contribution to the national wood supply. Just to put a number, we're talking about close to 95 to 97% of our roundwood production in the United States is coming from private forestry. If you go back to 1950s, almost it was a kind of reverse. pretty much most of the timber was coming from public lands.
Yes, state lands, yes. Is it correct to say, Professor, that the forests in the developed countries play mainly an economic role? Of course, now we add the environmental issues, while in developing countries, it embodies cultural and social factors as well?
Absolutely, sure. We just went a couple of days ago to Iwokrama. Sure, right there, many Amerindian communities
Yes.
are depending on not only for timber, for a variety of non-timber products that exist in these valuable forests. And that is true even in the United States. These days, there is a lot of attention is being paid for non-timber products. Non-timber products means, in a generic term, you can be talking about water quality or quantity, you can be talking about carbon, you can be talking about biodiversity, because we have a very world famous Endangered Species Act in place, and with pushing the boundaries in terms of biodiversity to the nth degree. Very successful act. It goes back to 1973. And also these days, non-timber products such as ginseng, so agroforestry practices to promote those kinds of things, even in the United States, is very high.
Flora and fauna also play a part.
Absolutely, sure. Under Endangered Species Act, you not only are paying attention to public forests, but a lot of private forests are being managed indirectly by the government agencies through incentive programs. You see, when it was started, not many incentive programs were there to influence private forest landowners to embrace Endangered Species Act. They first thought that, hey, this act is going to hurt our bottom line. But these days, because of the economic incentive program, I said you have good understanding of Florida. See, there is a unique program called Habitat Conservation Program in
Yes.
Florida to save gopher tortoise. Actually, if landowners could attract gopher tortoise to their land, actually government can provide monetary incentive for them. So now the forest landowners are perceiving this gopher tortoise as a kind of asset as opposed to liability.
Yeah. One of the challenges or conflicts in development is the forest versus subsoil mineral exploration. Has any country successfully or community successfully resolved that conflict?
Well, first of all, it is a challenging issue. Both are economic activities, and national governments wanted to pursue to advance their economic activity and provide jobs, which is one of the national goals of any government. But the nature of business is, yes, trees, sure, they are on the ground, and most of the minerals are subsurface. Now, when you are talking about this on the same land base, always there will be some kind of trade-off or some kind of conflict. But the question is, what kind of lessons learned by other countries who are doing these kinds of things for so long, and to what extent actually Guyana could learn from those lessons to better coordinate their leases, timber leases and mining leases here. One country that comes to my mind is Canada, because when I was doing my PhD at University of Alberta, Edmonton, Canada, the provincial government, which is Alberta government, was dealing with the same problem. They were giving concessions on forest land for timber concessions, but at the same time, another mining agency was giving oil and gas leases on the same land. Because there, of course, the weather conditions are very different. For oil and gas, to go inside and explore and dig oil and gas is different seasons. But for timber, they have to go at a certain point when the land is very, in summer they can't do this one harvesting because all the ice melts, and so their window of actually harvesting season would be very limited. But the point is, yes, that state learned quite a bit, and I'm actually wondering if Guyana's government would be very much interested actually to invite somebody from there, just to check it out. Hey folks, could you share what you have done? What kind of things over time you learned, and see if some kind of insights can be gained by the Guyanese government.
We talked earlier about Rio and the declaration. Has the world lived up to its promise? It's 21 years now, no?
Well, again, I always take glass half full approach. Sure, did the world make as much progress it wants to? I'm not sure, but a lot of things happened since then. Look at the awareness at children level, youth, or how at older at aged demographics. A lot of awareness is happening both in developed and developing countries about this climate change, global warming issue. And there's also a lot of discussion how to work with developing countries to influence or to make meaningful progress in terms of this economic development and energy security and climate change issues. See, look at RED Plus mechanism. Essentially, rich countries are coming forward actually, hey, let us use some kind of market principle so that the developing countries should not be at disadvantaged situation in this climate change initiative. So in a way, a lot of research took place. I think we made a lot of progress. Are we done? No, actually, there is a lot to be done. But I think yes.
We're heading in the right direction.
I think so. I believe so. Look at every country these days, and the fascinating thing is, my son until recently worked for Deutsche Bank in New York City. Deutsche Bank has an office actually focusing on sustainable development, climate change issues. Few years ago, it was unheard.
Yeah.
So a lot of private companies are also paying attention on these issues.
Professor, I may have been a little bit unfair on you. Your main area, I understand, is sustainable forest and land use. We didn't discuss that a lot. You want to tell us something about that?
Well, sure. Again, sustainable forestry, that word sustainable means maybe different meaning for different people. But the goal is essentially...
Are we talking decades? Are we talking century?
Well, sure.
The Green Heart, for example.
But again, it can be even short term. Some people might focus too much on just the ecological sustainability. But ideally speaking, when we talk about the national level or community level, we need to make sure, whoever is managing these forests, if we are talking about community, actually, Amerindian, one village or a couple of villages may be managing its own forests, owned or titled by them. They need to, they need to practice certain things to make sure that they don't put a lot of pressure on the environment. But at the same time, those practices should be socially acceptable. That's where the social issues comes. But also economic thing. Sure, they need to make sure they are viable in terms of economics. If they cannot make money, what would happen is essentially, that particular practice will become a liability as an asset. So that's the reason why, even if you go to my web page, the way I look at things and I do research is essentially come up with some kind of market solutions to address these problems or issues. So sustainable forestry to me is essentially how best we can manage to satisfy these three competing or sometimes complementary goals. They don't have to be competing goals, sometimes complementary. Look at some of the practices which certification processes of forestry these days, which is essentially to show to the consumers, hey, this wood is coming from sustainable practices, so it is okay to use. So that is a good sign where the market mechanisms and the ecological mechanisms are working together.
Can you refer us to some success stories in terms
Sure.
of success?
Like for example, let me give one example of the United States. Pretty much, I should say more than 90% or something. Timber comes from this certification process is called in the United States SFI, which is Sustainable Forestry Initiative. Actually, the people who produce lumber from these land base, they get this certification before they put their lumber into markets. Now you go to Canada, they have their own certification system. The good thing what Guyana has done here is the Forest Commission told that there is one certification system that has been in place here. It's called, I think, I hope I will get this right, European Union. The reason why that that term is there, because most of the timber is going to European market, and to satisfy those markets.
Well, not anymore.
Yeah,
not anymore.
But this
Much of it is now heading to China,
which is forest law enforcement and governance and trade.
Yes,
FLEGT.
yes.
Which is to me, it is its own certification process. If consumers are quite okay with that one, sure, they don't have to go and embrace X, Y, Z certification schemes.
As China promotes its economic boom, it has come in for lots of criticisms, even from the Soviet Union. Its misuse of forest resources. We think we see evidence of that in Ghana. Are you worried about China and its...
Say it again.
China's practices, the practices of Chinese forest companies in some of the regions in Russia. You hear, they're illegally logging.
I don't have much information about their practices in Russia, but if Guyana is issuing licenses to China, of course, it is the responsibility of the Guyanese Forest Commission to make sure, all the requirements that are being stipulated in the lease are, abide to those kinds of conditions here. But in Russia's situation, I'm not sure because I don't have much information.
The danger and the threat is an international one. If global warming takes place because of deforestation in a particular country, it affects everybody. How can the world, is it through the Kyoto type protocol that the world will regulate the use?
Well, sure. That can provide a kind of institutional structure for actually countries to effectively participate in buying or selling these credits. But yeah, definitely it provides some kind of mechanism. But there might be other opportunities as well. Actually, the domestic, the countries, they themselves can forward actually, hey, even if we don't participate in the Kyoto Protocol, can we manage our forest resources to the advantage of, sequestering carbon and at the same time to advance economic activity. For that, one thing I wanted to bring to your attention is there is still a kind of misperception among the communities and the households that, hey, cutting trees is a bad thing. But there is a lot of research out there, by following sustainable forestry practices, growing trees, harvesting them, and producing some kind of wood products like this, and by displacing high energy products, whether fossil fuels or steel, concrete, that's where the biggest benefit is going to be. So
we shouldn't have a guilt complex.
No, actually, we should be promoting those kinds of things. That way, that's where the biggest benefit is going to be. Because if you are producing one chair or table, it's going to sit for 50 years.
Yeah.
Now, what is the alternative? Then if you have to use a chair, if it is a steel one, so essentially right there you are putting 4 or 5 times more energy intensive product right there.
Guyana has committed itself to a low carbon development strategy, partly with encouragement from Norway. Is it morally just that northern developed countries should be imposing these rigorous environmental standards on developing countries, which see development as being necessary and at the same time bringing about environmental challenges?
Well, again, morally, if there is a coercive action, okay, you have to do this one for us, then I would.
Or if you don't do this, we wouldn't give you any money.
Well, you know, see, but if to me, I think, you know, Red Plus mechanism is a kind of voluntary participation. Yes, you know, here is our intent. You know, would you be willing to work with us? So to that extent, I don't, you know, personally speaking, I don't see a big moral problem there, because there is no coerciveness, you know, for any country that is selling carbon, you know, to engage into the transaction. That's how I characterize the situation. But again, you know, how best, you know, whether this country has enough information to participate. Again, it's a classic situation of a buyer-seller thing. But we need to make sure, you know, if sellers do not have full information set or something, that's where, you know, the research community or academic community should be helping. And actually, I asked the same question this afternoon to Mr. Sham Nokta. You know, if other countries wanted to participate, will we be able to provide some kind of lessons learned? Yeah, you know, he said yes. You know, that kind of information sharing should be there, so that you know, no one gets squeezed in this process.
The operator signaling we are almost near to time. So I want to take you back to your own country, India.
Although my country is the United States now.
Your former country. Okay. One of your several publications dealt with the impact of climate change on rural communities in the United States of America. Have you tried doing a mirror study on your own native India, briefly? Or has it been done by anyone else?
Oh yeah, you know, so many number of studies actually, you know, working with this native Indians culture, you know, how those cultures are going to influence the forest management. You know, actually, I did a lot of work when I was in Canada for 10 years. They had this big national initiative called Sustainable Forest Management Network. That's where, you know, a lot of native Indian cultural values are built into the social forest, sustainable forest management. A lot of information is out there.
Dr. Janaki Alavalapati, thank you very much for appearing on Plain Talk this evening.
It was a pleasure for me to participate in this.
And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the United States Embassy for facilitating this interview as well.
Thank you.
Operators and viewers, thank you. Good night. See you next week.